So welcome everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you here. Thank you for coming. I would like to, before we begin this afternoon, I'd like to first begin by paying respect to and thanking the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, on whose land we occupy if you're in Syracuse, New York right now. There is so much still we need to learn from their ability to live peacefully together amongst differences of tribal identities, geographies, and customs. I ask that we all consider our own place in the story of colonization and of undoing its legacy. So I am thrilled to be here to announce and launch our DEI lecture series for the fall. Been working in collaboration with Kyle Miller and other faculty. And this is very exciting, and also to have Dr. Peggy McIntosh as the person who leads us in this direction. This lecture series was created by and for students. The DEI Student Committee lecture series provides opportunities to engage with activists, educators, practitioners, and scholars to discuss topics affiliated with the committee's ambition to create diverse, equitable, and inclusive academic and professional environments. Generously supported by the Dean's Office, this student-led initiative invites speakers to present their work and foster broader discussions amongst students and faculty. All of our events are open to the school, and you're all encouraged to attend. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Peggy McIntosh as our first speaker of the fall. She was the former Associate Director of the Wellesley Center for Women and is also the founder and now Senior Associate of National SEED Project. SEED helps teachers and community members create their own local year-long led peer seminars in which participants use their own experiences and those of their students, children, and colleagues to widen and deepen school and college curricula and make communities and workplaces more inclusive. She was the co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Women's Institute and has been consulting editor at SAGE, a scholarly journal on Black women. In 1993 through 94, she consulted with women on 22 Asian campuses on the development of women's studies programs and to bring materials from women's studies into the main curricula. She directs the Gender, Race, and Inclusive Education Project, which provides workshops on privileged systems, feelings of fraudulence, and diversifying workplaces, curricula, and teaching methods. And with that, I am very welcome. I welcome her to speak with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you, and I want to thank any instructors who let your students in design studio classes listen in on this hour instead. And I hope that it will be useful to you, not necessarily today, not even this decade, but later in your life, looking back on what you were learning about privileged systems. And my dearest hope is that it will be of interest to you, even though paradoxically, it's mostly about my life. I do see systemically, but I'm only one little body in the body of the world. And from my one little body position, I began to notice how power works. And that led me to write a list of 46 ways in which I have unearned advantage by being born white in a culture that favors whites. It was a rather dreadful process to come to that realization. I, in fact, hated feeling that I had unearned advantage, but I decided I had, and that I'd better face it. So the way it happened is this: it was very nice white men in a seminar that I was facilitating at Wellesley Centers for Women, very nice white men who showed me their privilege They didn't mean to, but this is the way it went. The subject was new research on women and how we could bring these findings from new research on women in the 70s and 80s into the main liberal arts curriculum. And people came from all over New England, colleges and universities. 22 people came each year for that seminar, a different group each time. And we met for 5 hours, a very nice dinner in the middle of the session. And no matter what discipline you were in as a teacher, you could think aloud about how learning about women could improve the knowledge base in your teaching, your base of knowledge. Well, every September, the men and the women in the seminars got along just fine. But I noticed that by about January, the men wanted to sit by themselves at dinner and the women wanted to sit by themselves at dinner. And there was a kind of coldness in their relations. And I thought I had done something wrong as facilitator, but I wanted more money to continue these series. It had gone on for 4 years. We always had a big waiting list. So I thought that I should write my proposal to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, asking for 3 more years of funding. And that in my proposal, I should confess that I wasn't great at helping men and women to get along in this discussion. But I should say in the proposal that I would examine what I had done wrong to make the relations between men and women in the seminar get cooler and cooler as the academic year went on. And if they'd give me another $325,000, I would mend my ways and try to become a really good, even-handed facilitator. So I'm going through my notes. I was an assiduous note taker at that time, 1979, 80, 81. I wrote down everything. I didn't say much. I'm going through my notes looking for what I had done wrong over a given seminar year. And I found I hadn't actually done anything wrong, but the women asked a telling question, which threw us into a gender divide. One year, a woman said, well, I think that we should put these materials on women, which are so fascinating, we should put them in at the beginning into the introductory courses. And a very nice man, these were very nice and also brave men to come to a feminist seminar in a feminist college, or no, Wellesley wasn't that feminist, but a feminist seminar in a women's college. They got teased about that on their campuses. A very nice man explained to us you couldn't do that. He said in those intro courses, you're laying the foundation blocks for knowledge. And if you're laying the foundation blocks for knowledge, you can't put in soft stuff. Now, none of us said anything, neither the men nor the women. But he had called all this stuff we'd been reading soft, many hardback books, many articles from refereed journals. And he had said it was all soft, and all of us were silent. And then a couple of years later, I found in my notes that another man had, and I'm grateful to both of them because they showed us what they were really thinking. Another man had responded to a similar question. A faculty member who was a woman said, You know, it's too late to wait until senior year and then give the course, which is the feminist critique of your discipline. It's too late. We should get these materials in at the beginning. And another very nice man explained that first year, the students are choosing their major. Their major is their discipline. And if you want a student to think in a disciplined way, you can't put in extras. And none of us said anything, neither men nor women, to the idea that women are extra. But as the weeks went on, I thought, well, come to think of it, that guy is born of a woman, and so was everybody in the seminar, and so is everybody on the face of the earth. So what has been done to his mind to make him think that women are extra? And he was a very nice man. And as I say, I'm grateful he showed us that at least in curricular terms, women were extra. That's the key hedge here, in curricular terms. And I thought, he is a very nice man, but probably niceness has nothing to do with it. He's just a very good student, as I was too, of a whole litany of examples of how we were extra. What we were all taught in college and also in school was that men have knowledge. Men make more knowledge. Men publish and profess knowledge as professors, and men are in charge of the best known research universities and the best known university presses, and we have taken in, and I had too, that men are knowers, and even that knowledge is male, is possessed by men. And I remembered Widener Library at Harvard with its 17 million volumes written by men about the experience of people all over the world, but written by men. And I had taken it in that they were the knowledgeable ones. And while I was thinking of that, I said, well, it doesn't have to do with their moral fiber. It's what we were all taught, and they've internalized it, that they are the real knowers. And that's why women can't be put into the curriculum first year, because we are truly, as they learned it, extra. Now then I thought, I don't want to go here. I really don't want to go here. But women of color in the Boston area have been saying, since 1977 anyway, in print, that white women are, they didn't put it in these same words, these exact words, but white women are oppressive to work with. Not some white women, just white women. And my first response to those ideas, when I encountered them in 1980, I had two responses, and I remembered that I first thought, in a kind of whine, I don't see how they can say that about us. I think we're nice. And then I remembered my second response had been indignant and is deeply racist, but this is where I was in 1980. I especially think we're nice if we work with them. And for those of you listening, for me, one of the big turns of consciousness occurs when people who are raised to look down on others start to learn from those others. And I hadn't done that. So I was expected, thanks for working with people I had been taught to look down on, which is women of color, Black women in the Boston area. So then I thought, I don't like this. I don't like this one little bit, but I'm afraid there's a parallel between what I was taught about myself and what these men were taught about themselves. And it's a racial parallel. I realized I had been taught whites have knowledge, whites make more knowledge, whites publish and profess knowledge as professors, and whites are in charge of the best known research universities, and whites run the best known university presses. And we have taken in the idea that whites are knowers and knowledge is white. And I thought then also a very unpleasant thought, maybe the reason I get grants to do my research is that I'm white. And I have the knowledge system on my side. And I realized every foundation I had ever gotten a grant from was run by white people. So then I felt, so I've got the money system working for me too. The knowledge system and the money system. This isn't fair. I had thought that I got grants because I wrote such good proposals. And now I began to think, maybe the women of color write better proposals even, but they're not white. So they don't have the whole knowledge system and the money system on their side. And I didn't want to think about this because it was destroying my idea that under meritocracy, everything I had is what I had wanted and worked for and earned and deserved. And now suddenly the thought of maybe something outer, systemic, beyond me had caused my success in getting grants. It was quite sickening. But I decided to explore it, and I asked my mind, what else do I have beside the money system and the knowledge system working for me? And my mind refused to answer. And that was unusual. I was used to asking my mind questions and having it respond. And it wouldn't say a word. I kept asking, is there anything I didn't earn beside having the knowledge system and the money system working for me? And it zipped its lip. My mind did. And I felt I was in a spiritual crisis over this. That if I hadn't earned what I had, I'd better find out about it. But I didn't want to know it. But I'd better find out. So going to bed one night, I more or less screamed, though my husband said it wasn't a scream. If I have anything I didn't earn except the knowledge system and the money system working for me, by contrast with my Black friends, show me. And in the middle of the night, up swam an example, and I wrote it down. And I was disgusted. I thought it was trivial. If you read the White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack paper, it's the first example of the 26 you encountered in that paper. It was, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. And I looked at it and thought, this is trivial. But I turned the light off again and went back to sleep. And in the morning, I still thought it was trivial. But it had come perfectly. I'm an English teacher, so it amused me that all my examples came up from my subconscious to my conscious mind, perfectly edited, perfectly grammatical, perfectly punctuated. And this one, which I thought was so trivial. Well, why did I think it was trivial? I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. Why did I think that was trivial? Well, I think I was looking for the next big thing, as they say, and I had identified the money system, whites in foundations, and the knowledge systems, whites as knowledge makers. And I was looking for the next big thing, and all I got was this thing about being in the company of people of my race. However, now I think it's huge, because being able to be in the company of people of my race most of the time amounted to never having to be the lonely and never having to be the only. Well, after that, night after night, the examples came swimming up, and I would turn on the light and write them down. And my husband asked, "What are you writing?" after a couple of weeks of this. And I didn't know yet. So I just babbled. I said, "Ken, there's this whole, it's not fair. Nobody told me there's this big," and he fell back asleep, of course, as well he might. And again, he asked, the whole process of getting out the 46 examples took 3 months. In about 2 months, he asked again, and still I could only babble because I didn't yet have the words I wanted to use for this thing of being given what I hadn't earned. And finally, just before the end of my collection of these examples, he said, "Tonight, I'm really going to listen. What are you writing?" And by then I knew. I said, "Ken, I'm writing down stuff I don't want to know, and we can talk in the morning." And then my subconscious also said to me, "Peggy, you should write this down and publish it, this list of white unearned advantages, which you're now calling white privileges. You should write it down. It's probably the most important work you'll do in your life." And it has turned out to be that. But when I took it to our working papers committee of the Wellesley Centers for Women, they turned it down. They said, "We can't publish this. It's just anecdotes." For those of you who haven't had a chance to read, I'll give you a couple more examples of what they have turned down. "I can remain oblivious of the language and the customs of people of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion." Or "I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. If the cops pull me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race." Or I'll just give you 2 more, because some of you have read this. Some of you I know have read it in high school. Some of you have read it in college. "If my day, week, or year is going badly, I don't need to ask of each negative episode or situation whether it has any racial overtones. I don't have to worry." And finally, "I can choose blemish cover or bandages in so-called flesh color and have them more or less match my skin." I like the English anthropologist and economist who said, "Skin is never white." She was a white woman, quote unquote, but she said, "I am not the color of this piece of paper." And then she said, and people of color in the UK, we called it then England, people of color in England are not the color of this black ink. And then she held up her hand like this and said, "I am in fact a kind of pinky gray." And I liked the way she handled that. But in any case, these words, black and white, were too simple, too inaccurate. Well, the Working Papers Committee said, we can't publish this, it's not research, it's just anecdotes. And I understood, but I began to collect money for copyright fee, 50 cents per copy that you make for your classes. And it was being bought by psychologists, sociologists, African American studies, ethnic studies, American studies, English, education, anthropology, political science, even economics was selling like hotcakes, and I made $20,000 at the first year. So I took it back to the committee and said, I'm making a lot of money from this paper, and if you will publish it from the centers, not from me, but from the centers, and you can charge $6, which was our price at the time. And they said, okay, we'll take another look at it. And they came back into the committee of the Working Papers group and said, we have a reputation to uphold for doing research on women. And your paper has no footnotes. No footnotes. So I said, I understand. And I kept making money from it. If you read the little one, White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, you'll notice it doesn't have footnotes for those examples. They're just about autobiographical. They're about my experience. I wasn't speaking for all white people. So my research sample was one. But in architecture, you often find a building that has been built is one of its kind, just one of a kind. That there's no scorn for the sample of one in architecture. You can be unique. This paper was pretty unique. But in any case, after they turned it down the second time and I kept making money from it, then that subconscious voice woke me up in the middle of the night about 3 months later and said, Freud didn't have footnotes. So I took that to the committee. I said, again, I understand this doesn't look like research, doesn't sound like research, but I just want to mention that Freud didn't have footnotes. So Sigmund Freud was a big name, and anybody who was teaching psychology, especially the foundations of psychology, would have him in the reading list. He was a big enough name. So that they looked at each other like this and they shrugged. They said, okay. So then they did publish it as a working paper. The most common question that I get asked after I give a talk on having white privilege is, how did you come to notice it? So I've told you that. That's what I've been doing now for 20 minutes. And the original paper was long, 19 pages with 46 examples. But a wonderful woman who worked for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Philadelphia asked, can I condense your paper into 3 pages? And I said yes. And she pulled the title out of it, The Metaphor of the Invisible Knapsack, and used it. So it's called White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Then later I wrote more papers, one on white privilege, color, and crime, and the way I can get away with a lot of criminal stuff without being noticed, or without starting off with on the bad footing with the police. And then I wrote another one about how white privilege is actually like a bank account that I can spend down. I didn't ask for it. I can't be blamed for it. But it's like a bank account of money that I can use to weaken the system that gave it to me, if I wish. And when I do that, because as a white, and a white female who used to be blonde, I get given the benefit of the doubt in situations of authority. So even if I spend down my bank account to weaken the system of white privilege, it'll keep refilling whether or not I want it to. So I'll never go bankrupt spending down my bank account of white skin privilege. And it is actually quite transformative to realize what power you have been given through no particular strength of your own, and spend it down. That it transformed my life to do that. Now I'd like to ask among the participants, and thank you all, 127 of you, for tuning in, as we used to say on the radio. Thank you for listening and entering this space, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have or any comments that you would like to make. And I think that Andrew Malloy will help us to engineer that. So I'll sit here and see what happens.
So if you could use the hand raise tool, then I can call on you, just because there's multiple windows and I'll miss people. So if you could just use that, please, that will help facilitate the discussion. Tara, please.
Hi. First, thanks so much for coming. I had read your article for a facilitator class we're doing this fall, actually, and I was just wondering, your male colleagues, what was their reaction when you published that paper?
It's a pretty even-tempered paper, and they were very impressively even-tempered at receiving it. They thought it was rational. Now, let me say that if you're in college and you're a young white male who've never heard of this, and then the paper is given to you, you may explode, feeling insulted. Have you seen that happen?
I haven't particularly seen any explosions, and I think part of that's because, okay, well, I don't exactly want to say it like that. I think the much younger generation is a lot more open to the idea of there being white male privilege, but I will say, I mean, I'm a much older student. I'm in my late 30s, and I can say certainly people above me, older than me, at the same age as me, will sometimes have that disbelief still that it's a thing. And I know that I've been trying to have these tough discussions with my parents. My mom, who's been, you know, a long time feminist, but I don't think she realized some of the racial undercurrents of some of the things she's been saying. And, you know, being able to send her your Invisible Knapsack article actually was a really good starting point to kind of give her that comparison of how she feels as a woman in a male-dominated society, to be able to break it down how people of color feel in a white-dominated society. And so I feel like it's both caused some levels of, I mean, a lot of discomfort for men, but I think it has given, especially a lot of white women, a starting point to get into the conversation.
Well, it makes me happy to hear that you gave it to your mother. That takes courage. And I'm glad that if you think it worked, it was useful.
Definitely.
And if you find it online on the nationalseedproject.org site, you'll see it comes with 2 pages called Notes for Facilitators of my work on white privilege. And the first line in that list of notes for facilitators of my work on white privilege is my work is not about blame, shame, or guilt. And congratulations to you for not conveying to your mother that you were blaming or shaming her. Because it's not, none of these arbitrary systems we were born into did we invite. I mean, did we invent? We didn't invent them. We can't be blamed for our placement in them. We were just born into this circumstance or that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you Tara?
Yeah, I'm Tara.
Tara Pearson.
Okay.
Peggy, I'm one of the things the knapsack made me think about, especially given everything that's been happening since the summer, is issues around guilt and how to channel that privilege into productive action moving forward for change. And I think there's a real reckoning that many in this country are going through when that consciousness has happened. And I think this summer, between George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's killings, it was a moment of clarity unlike any other in my lifetime, at least. And I think how one reconciles their own privilege, being born into it, and what do you do moving forward to create change is, it's overwhelming. And I think what you talk about, I mean, some of the things you raise very much speak to this.
One heartbreaking thing is that so many people have had to be exposed so roughly and so suddenly to the difference between growing up middle class and white in this country and growing up poor and being identified as a person of color. It's been a horrible, sudden revelation for those who had most power before. And it's heartbreaking to see the roughness of the analysis, that it gets construed as the rich whites. No two rich whites are the same. There's tremendous diversity among white populations. Or all blacks are given the same kind of the same portrait suddenly as victims, as downtrodden. Well, those who are Black who do not identify as downtrodden are insulted by this kind of exaggeration. Then Asians and Latinos, especially those who are professors, find themselves listed among those who have no assets. It's so sad. It is so sad, such a rough awakening. We didn't ask for it. The pandemic did it. But I like it when universities and schools introduce political ideas such as privilege systems gradually and shall I even say gracefully, because I'm thinking of Tara, who approached her mother gracefully with this. I like it, I admire it when college faculties start students who hadn't been thinking politically along racial lines or class lines to read some analytical things and have a class discussion on the basis of their own experience. So that every student in the room, well, let me do it with your group right now of 123. We're not pairing you up, though in a faculty workshop tomorrow, I will be having breakout rooms where faculty can talk to each other. But Here's an example of something anybody can do just sitting by themselves and thinking. It's an exercise in looking at your own experience, and it's not rough, and it's not angry, and it doesn't have a crisis in it. All it has is reflection, the luxury of private reflection. So here's the exercise. It's based on my conviction that all of us have a combination of unearned disadvantage and unearned advantage in our life. I don't know anybody anywhere who doesn't have a combination of unearned disadvantage and unearned advantage, and that's privilege, in their life. And the question is, well, exactly what does that mean for any individual life? And instead of answering with any broad brush convictions, this allows every individual to ask first. So if you're in the audience, feel free to do this for 1 minute. Think about any way in your life in which you have had some unearned disadvantage. You can't be blamed or shamed about it. It was circumstantial. You didn't invent the system that gave it to you. Now, it could have to do with something very bodily, like your height, the quality of your voice, your hair, your body type. Or it could have something to do more with circumstances beyond your individual body. For example, your parents' relation to income, your parents' relation to formal schooling, your parents' nationalities and ethnicities, your parents' relation to religion, your parents' relation to geography. Or it could have something to do with family structures, your place in the birth order. I'm being told to start my video. I thought my video was on.
There we go.
Okay. Your place in the birth order. That could work for you as a plus, or it could work as a minus, or both. Any of these conditions that you didn't ask for can work as an advantage or a disadvantage. It depends on your life, and it may also something may start out being a disadvantage for you, and then as your life unrolls, turn out to be an advantage. So that what you were sorry about at the beginning turned out to be a strength of some kind. Anyway, participants, over 120 of you.
We have another question.
Please think for 1 minute about, please think for 1 minute. What are one or more ways in which you feel you've had unearned disadvantage in your life? We'll time that at 1 minute. If this were a breakout session, you would have 1 minute. This thing has made it hard for you in some ways. And it was a hardness that you didn't ask for. My own personal disadvantage was a bullying older brother. I didn't ask for it. Can't be ashamed about it, but it made life hard. Okay, and now the other side of the coin. What are one or more ways in which you feel circumstances helped you to get ahead, circumstances not of your making? And of course, that could have to do with any of the variables I mentioned before, being oldest in a family, being born to a family that knew they could send you to college and afford it. All those things, it wasn't of your making, but it helped. Maybe going to a college where you got a scholarship. You didn't invent the scholarship fund, but it was there when you wanted it. All of those are privileges. So 1 minute on your unearned advantages. So thank you for doing that. And that's called thinking systemically, as against thinking individualistically. But when you're studying privilege, you need to do both simultaneously. Think as an individual and then see yourself within the bigger systems. And it's really hard to do it. Nobody ever trained you to do it. Our schools tend to teach children to think individualistically, not to think circumstantially about what put them ahead and what put them back. So you're doing that. And I'm really very impressed at how few of you left the exercise. Some people assume as soon as the students start talking, well, that's the time to leave the auditorium because what do students know? But with this, you stayed with it. And you didn't say, well, just looking at my own life, what do I know? You are the authority, the only authority in the universe on your own life and the politics of your own life. And I'm really very impressed at the way you stayed with the group and doing your private thinking. So what do you do with something like that? That part of it is once you see what privilege you have and what disadvantage you have, then that alters the way you look at other people in the world with more empathy, more understanding, including empathy for those who appear to have it made but are scared to death in their heart of hearts. Now, Lori, you said you had another question.
We have a hand raised from Alexander.
Alexander.
So you said earlier, you pointed out that in the field of architecture, there is no shame in a sample size of one. And that kind of struck me. And I was wondering, are there other fields where that is the case?
I suppose the field of art generally would be another such case. But, you know, I have very great respect for architecture, and I have relatives who are architects and ancestors who are architects. And maybe you can answer this question. Why doesn't I may be wrong about this, but I get the impression, you know, when people are boasting about their children, they say, my son the doctor, my son the lawyer, my daughter the lawyer, my son the lawyer. Why doesn't architecture, I'm taking this up with faculty tomorrow, have equal respect? Why doesn't architecture get put right there with doctoring and lawyering as a profession that is powerful, complicated, useful, interesting, creative, and to which we're indebted? Now, maybe this fact that you can be a sample of one in art or architecture detracts from the power it should have and its reputation. I don't know. So over to you.
I have to imagine it's probably the same reason people would have little respect for a farmer or anything that can be done right in front of you, because a building is done right in front of you. You know, a bike is very concrete, that's right in front of you, and it's not hard to understand on the surface. So why would you have a huge amount of respect for someone who designs bikes? Because the actual physics going on behind the scenes don't seem apparent, don't seem to matter until you understand them. I would imagine that's part of it.
I think you're brilliant. It's very manual. And I notice even in the art museums that the legend that you're meant to look at to explain what the art is almost never mentions the manual conditions that went into the production of the art. There's an avoidance of what is material. There's in the museums I'm talking about, there's an avoidance of talking about how you make things in art. You make things, the making gets left off, and you're told how this work of art connects with other works of art elsewhere. And yes, the building is real, it is material. Of course, not everything you see inside the building is available to you when you look at the building, but the building itself can't fall down. You have to have purchase on the laws of physics, and you create something that can be seen like the bike and used like the bike. It should have more respect, should have more of our respect. Now, somebody put on a chat just now and said to everyone, Laurie, can you read that chat comment?
Sure. From Jose, I would say that it depends on the family and household. For me, for instance, an architect is considered a respected field of a similar or same level to scientists or lawyers, etc.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. That's what I want throughout the society. We say that food, clothing, and shelter matter. Architects shelter us, not just in the big corporate sense, but close to home. They make home. So I would love it if in his family, respect for architects is as high as it would be for science, people in the science professions. We're talking about the politics of perception. And I was saying, I don't think that, I think that doctoring and lawyering are privileged over other professions, and that it's not fair to architecture to not have it up in that pantheon. We're so indebted to it. Your room, my room. Thank you, architects. But also Adobe Pueblos in Taos, marvelous examples of human engineering. Human engineering from the earth. I can't hear you.
Any other questions or comments from the audience?
Well, Ashley, from Ashley to everyone.
Mm.
Can you read that one out loud?
She wanted to thank you for what you shared. Your comment about all of us being born with both advantages and disadvantages was a wonderful thing to think about. Thank you.
Good. And my hope, as I said, is that this session will be of use. Not necessarily today, though for Ashley it was, and not even necessarily in 10 years, but that as life unrolls, the idea of privilege and disadvantage and how to study them without going bonkers in some way is useful. That's my hope. I enjoyed and appreciated the many participants and the fact that they hung in there for the personal reflection. Thank you to the technical staff, Took and Andrew. What would we do without you? You are absolutely essential workers, so you should be paid more.
Thanks, Peggy.
Well, thank you so much. This was a great way to start our series.
Good. Oh, I wrote a book. Here's the book. This is 16 essays. 6 of them are on privilege. It's called On Privilege, Fraudulence, and Teaching as Learning. And if you Google Routledge, R-O-U-T, Routledge, Peggy McIntosh, you'll see the book. It's very new on the market. And the six essays include the one on using your privilege to weaken the system that gave it to you, and also the one on white privilege, color, and crime, and also one on 5 myths that keep racism in place and make people reject the thesis that privilege exists. And the myths are the myth of meritocracy, which is that you earned what you have, but also the myth of white racelessness, that other people have race, but whites don't have a race. And the third part is myth of monoculture, which is that it's just one big culture, and everybody experiences life the same way. And if you're having trouble, that's your problem. That's the myth of monoculture. And the list of myths that keep racism in place and keep people from taking privilege and disadvantage discussion seriously. It ends with this one, the myth of white managerial and moral superiority. And I was certainly raised with it. We were better at holding it all together. So of course we were the leaders. My group, my ethnic group, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, we knew how to make lists and organize people. And so of course we were in charge. It was just natural. That's the myth of white moral and managerial superiority. Goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be
Thank you.
talking. You can email me if there are any things you would particularly hope I would raise with the faculty. I will have the faculty tomorrow in with breakout groups, chat rooms. You have a wonderfully diverse student body at the School of Architecture. From my point of view, what with all the international students and students of color, But from my point of view, the faculty looks so it isn't. It has only, if I understand correctly, one Black faculty member.
Mhm.
And I used to be in a university that had that kind of layout. For example, there were 33 faculty members, one Black woman, and 2 white women, and everybody else was white male.
Mm.
So I know
Yeah.
you can be in that without quite realizing it doesn't correspond to the world.
Right. Yeah.
Goodbye, Jaden and all the others.
Well, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And students can write to me or you about
Okay.
anything that they hope that the faculty will think about.
Okay.
Okay,
Have a good evening.
same to you.